The murders of Australian mother Hannah Clark and her 3 children almost a year ago triggered a national debate about domestic violence. Submissions closed yesterday for the New South Wales inquiry into coercive control. A joint select committee is reviewing submissions and calling for hearings so people can give evidence and report to the Attorney-General Mark Speakman by the end of June. For more, I'm joined by Hayley Foster, CEO of Women's Safety New South Wales. Hayley, good morning to you. It's a very confronting and important discussion. Firstly, though, can you explain to us exactly what coercive control is?
Absolutely. Look, coercive control is it's the use by an abuser of a range of forms of abuse over time for the purpose of establishing control and domination over their victim. It's a very incident-based, it's not an incident-based, it's looking at a pattern of behaviours over time, and that's the difference. It's not just a single incident of perhaps a physical or sexual assault.
So it's not just a romantic partner, it could be a friend, a family member, a colleague, even a child. Can you give us some examples of what coercive control might be?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the kinds of behaviours that we see in coercive control are things like monitoring and surveilling, isolating a victim, controlling their resources, their access to finances, for example, but also, frightening and threatening them, and also using mechanisms to really undermine their sense of self and autonomy and really their own belief in their own judgment, for example. So we see things like monitoring and controlling daily activities. Really, it's about dominating that individual so that they are under your control.
So what are you hoping will come out of the submissions?
Yeah, look, we're really pleased that the New South Wales Government has taken this step. It's going to be a very considered approach. The Joint Select Committee is quite a broad cross-section of parties involved, and what we're hoping to see are recommendations around a very carefully worded provision that make sure that we get the balance right, that we criminalise the conduct that is described to us by victim survivors across the country as being the most dangerous and damaging aspect of the abuse that they've experienced. But not only that, it is actually the single biggest precursor to domestic homicide. And I think that's the main thing that sparked Mark Speakman to look into this, is that Death Review Committee report.
Because coercive control is actually considered a crime in parts of Europe. So what are we learning from them?
Yeah, look, it's been really interesting actually talking to our sister services over there, and prosecutors and police and magistrates or sheriffs in Scotland. What we're seeing is that it is taking some time for it to be embedded, but there are a doubling of prosecutions occurring each year now in England and Wales. So it is really, really, the main thing actually that's been picked up is that it's educating the community about what is at the very core of domestic abuse, what are its most dangerous elements, and how to pick up the signs as to whether you yourself might be in danger or someone that you care about.
Yeah, and through the pandemic, have we seen an increase in cases?
Yes, we've absolutely seen an increase in cases during the pandemic. And, it's very difficult to kind of isolate particular factors, but what we're hearing from people who've experienced violence on the ground is that it's really just been the practicalities of being caught up 24/7, behind closed doors with their abuser without being able to access those other external supports. As we know, coercive control centres on isolating that victim, monitoring them at all stages. So you can imagine being locked at home with their abuser. It was going to make it worse. Economic factors as well coming out of COVID have also played their part.
Hayley, a number of politicians have joined forces to back this campaign against coercive behaviour. Talk us through this.
Yeah, look, I think it's wonderful to see this as not being too politicised. This is about members of Parliament all coming together and saying, we want to stop this crisis of violence against women. We're really sick of seeing these horrendous murders. We need some serious action. We need to send a very clear signal that this sort of behaviour will not be tolerated in the community. So, look, I really think that Hannah Clark and her children's, the tragedy there has sparked a national conversation and also broken some inertia so that politicians of all persuasions are standing up and saying, let's do something about this that's going to make a real difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you say there's a mixture of shame and perhaps denial for people presenting coercive behaviour to someone? And Hayley, are you seeing many people come forward and try to get help regarding their behaviour?
Yeah, absolutely. We know that domestic abuse is something that we've always thought should just stay behind closed doors. It's somebody else's business. It's not my business to intrude. But that's changing now. And we find that with this campaign, with what's happened to Hannah Clark as well, but the campaign that we're doing with Marie Claire, we've found that more and more women who are coming forward, obviously it occurs in both genders, but primarily women are coming forward and saying, oh my gosh, that's me. I never realised that that was abuse. I've been terrified. I've felt locked into this. I felt really afraid to leave. But I didn't know that that's what I was experiencing. And so we have seen quite a significant number of victim survivors coming forward and seeking help for the first time.
And what about men? Because we often hear that men are victims in violence. Why is the focus so high on women, and what can men do if they are in certain situations?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, domestic and family violence can be perpetrated by anyone. And anyone can be the victim. That's absolutely true. What we find about coercive control, however, as opposed to single incidents of physical assault, for example, is it is highly gendered. We know that over 95% of prosecutions in the UK have had a male perpetrator or male offender, and this is the very nature of coercive control and those sort of relations. So we do know, however, that there are cases where it is a female perpetrator and a male victim. They're few and far between, but it's really important, and this is part of the reforms, it's very, very important that we resource and support law enforcement agencies as part of this process to make it much easier for them to determine who is the primary victim and who is the primary aggressor in the situation. If we resource police, we know from Scotland that we're going to get a much better result, and that won't just sit as a law on the shelf.
All right, yes, education, early intervention and support so vital. Thank you so much, Hayley Foster, CEO of Women's Safety in New South Wales. We look forward to hearing more about this reform.
Thanks for having us, Jane.